let's dive into our conversation with Andy and Sean here. You guys excited? Thanks for coming.
Very excited. Thank you for being.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show and chat about fishing tonight. First things first, I kind of want to dive into a little bit of background for those watching. I know, Andy, you've kind of come up through the ranks. You started at FWC, right?
I did. Yeah, I worked for FWC for about 3 years, and then I've been with NOAA Fisheries for now 20 years and 4 different job responsibilities.
Wow.
And I know we'll be talking about gag and maybe a little red snapper tonight. I've done research on both of those species, so they followed me throughout my entire career.
So when you were at FWRI or FWC, you did research on them?
I did research actually at Florida State University, and then on for my graduate degree at University of South Alabama, studying both of those species. So I've been in management for 23 years, starting with FWC.
So you were an FSU guy, huh? I didn't
am
know
an
that about
FSU guy, Garnet and Gold.
Heck yeah, I was born there. So you got 2 FSU fans here, man.
Wow, outnumbered. Okay. Well, it is what it is. We'll forgive you for that.
You're lucky.
And then you went to South Alabama for your graduate degree, you said?
Yeah, I did my graduate school at Dauphin Island Sea Lab, University of South Alabama.
Nice. And so red grouper and red snapper specifically were kind of your starting points?
I started with Gag Grouper.
Oh, Gag Grouper.
Worked with researchers at Florida State University that Chris Koenig and Felicia Coleman, who you may know, world-renowned scientist. And then I went on to study red snapper at University of South Alabama.
Nice. So you've grown up, if you will, with the Gag Grouper and red snapper in the Gulf, and it's been a focus. That's interesting. I didn't know that myself. So I was talking to someone today about tonight's show, and they were asking some science questions about Gag Grouper, and I was like, listen, Andy's management side of things, we're not really going to be focused on science, but little did I know that the science part of Gag Grouper was a big focus for you when you were starting out at FWC. So did you work for FWC or FWRI?
I worked for Fish and Wildlife Commission, the Division of Marine Fisheries.
Okay.
So out of Tallahassee.
Oh, cool. Division of Marine Fisheries. Nice. And then, Sean, how did you get started in this whole arena?
I was lucky enough to start in the Florida Keys as a seagrass researcher, and started with NOAA 24 years ago. It'll be 24 years in September. Wow. So I've been in a while as well. My original obligation with NOAA or responsibility was seagrass damage assessment and restoration in Florida Keys.
Wow.
So when boaters would run aground, the smart ones would stop, trim up their engine, push their boat off, or call sea tow. Mm-hmm. The not so good ones would make a swimming pool out of it by backing off with their engines. And so I got to do the damage assessment, work with law enforcement, fill them back up, plant them with seagrass, and do that sort of thing. So that was my start with NOAA in the Florida Keys.
So essentially, between the two of you, we have almost 50 years in fisheries service, essentially.
I think he's saying we're old, Andy.
No,
I
was saying you were
lying.
Yeah, I'm feeling that. Okay.
I was saying you're experienced, but you're twisting my words.
And we've only just begun.
So, also, for those listening, I know you're saying the seagrass restoration, but really, you've, in your career, one of the cool things that I am actually very jealous of is your NOAA diving career. So
yeah,
that's a big part of what you've done.
Yeah, after my work in the Keys, I came up here and was with the NOAA Restoration Center. I've been a NOAA diver since 2001, so that's a pretty intense course. And eventually in 2008, I became a unit dive supervisor. So I have 13 divers throughout Florida and Puerto Rico and St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And they do coral research, damage assessment, all that sort of work down there and do amazing stuff, cutting-edge technology.
So you are over the south, both of you are southeast, so Caribbean, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, all of the South Atlantic and the Gulf. So when you're diving any of those areas through your career?
Yep, any and all those areas. I've had dive operations throughout.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been
cool.
It's been great. I've been very, very fortunate. It's been wonderful.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
I love diving. I don't get to do it enough, you know.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of gear. We have a lot of safety requirements with the government. You know, they make sure that we're safe.
Plenty of training.
We're safe. We train. You know, CPR. I'm a CPR instructor. All that stuff. So we have some great divers, and we do some really amazing work work.
The amount of safety training that just goes into a recreational dive is a lot.
Right.
So I couldn't imagine going on a dive working for the federal government under a federal government contract. I can imagine the paperwork and the training that goes into that.
And a bit of gear. There's a bit of gear that we put on the boat. But yeah,
Nice.
like I said, we do some kind of extensive diving. We do some remote diving, like Mona Island off Puerto Rico. That's 30 miles off the coast, and there's no facilities out there.
Wow.
So we have to make sure we can self-rescue and get back to the mainland into a hyperbaric chamber if that happens.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So a little bit about you guys, and then your titles. I know, Andy, you're the regional administrator of the Southeast region. So for those watching, what does that entail? Like your job description, we probably don't have enough show to really go into the whole breadth of it, but a 100,000-foot summary of what's your day-to-day look like? Because I know it's a lot of meetings.
It is a lot of meetings. So my title is the Regional Administrator for NOAA Fisheries. We're headquartered here in St. Petersburg, Florida. Our region extends from North Carolina to Texas, including the U.S. Caribbean. My day-to-day responsibilities include sustaining fisheries throughout the Southeast, including commercial and recreational, but also have major responsibilities with regard to habitat conservation, working with constituents as well to protect endangered species, threatened species. So we have responsibilities under the Marine Mammal Protection Act as well as the Endangered Species Act. So my day-to-day is hopping a lot of times from one meeting to the next. I spend 10, 12 weeks a year going to council meetings, fishery management council meetings. I am a voting member of all 3 fishery management councils in the Southeast. And so we have broad responsibility and jurisdiction to protect, sustain, conserve resources throughout the Southeast.
Yeah, because with the Gulf Council and the South Atlantic Council and the Caribbean Council, the councils don't necessarily have the authority over marine mammals and coastal areas like, say, red tide, sea turtles, sharks. These things are outside the council process, but it still kind of falls under your purview at NOAA Fisheries.
Correct, yeah, and we have an office of about 150 employees that includes full-time employees and contractors. Obviously, Sean's here, he's our recreational coordinator, but teams of people that are working in all of these different areas beyond just working with you and others in fisheries management.
Yeah, fisheries management is one small section of the overall NOAA Fisheries kind of job description, huh?
It is, but certainly for my job responsibilities, it takes a majority of my time.
I gotcha. That's interesting. And for those listening, one of the cool things about our area, Central West Florida, is it's home to the headquarters of NOAA Fisheries, and also FWC is right here, FWRI is right here. So there's a lot of stuff in our backyard, and potentially almost closely was the Southeast Fisheries Science Center moving up here too, but I guess that's kind of TBD, huh? They're still fighting over that?
Still to be determined. Yeah, there's certainly interest in the Science Center, at least in part, maybe moving from Miami up here to St. Petersburg. But we have a great partnership in St. Pete with the Innovation District, University of South Florida, USGS, a whole host of agencies that are working on marine science.
It's really cool downtown St. Pete how kind of USF, that water side downtown USF campus kind of congeals into the Florida Wildlife Research Institute, or FWRI, which is the research branch of FWC, and then it all of a sudden kind of matriculates over to CERO, the Southeast Regional Office, where you guys work. It's cool how that whole waterfront works together. And I missed Marine Quest this year.
Yep.
Yeah, that stunk.
Yeah,
How did that go?
It went well. It was a couple weekends ago. It was well attended. We changed it to February, but that's always a popular thing, is our Science Fest. And we're out there. We have tons of our staff volunteers, because they look forward to it every year, engaging with school kids and just the general public come by, learning more about marine science.
Yeah, it's awesome. For those, we mentioned Marine Quest, but unfortunately, since I kind of dropped the ball myself, we didn't do a good job kind of promoting it on the show, but we mentioned it, and definitely next year we're going to do a better job of telling you guys about it, because you got to stop down to Marine Quest, because you can experience that whole waterfront, kind of like what I was talking about. So that's a little bit about your job description. Sean, you're the rec fishing coordinator for the Southeast region. So I know when I have problems, which tend to occur from time to time, you're the point of contact, huh?
So I'm lucky in that I get to focus on one small sliver of fisheries. Andy has to juggle everything. So yeah, I have the greatest job in the world. I'm the rec fishing coordinator. So basically, I am a liaison, a point of contact, a window, however you want to put it, for millions of fishermen in the southeast United States and the federal government. So if you have questions about fisheries management, fisheries science, regulations, things
Whales.
going on with whales. Yeah, sure, North Atlantic right whales. I am lucky enough to be able to be that face for fishermen. And, I can only meet so many people, but that's the best part of my job is talking with fishermen, getting the word out. So we are trying to be better. I'm lucky enough to be a full-time rec fishing coordinator. I'm one of 2 in the whole country. So that shows you how serious the Southeast takes recreational fishing, that I'm dedicated to that. And I get grumpy calls, but that's okay. Those are fishermen who care about their fishing, and they want the best answers. So
Generally, I don't call you unless I'm grumpy.
no, well, that's okay. I appreciate it, and I will do my best to get the answer. And often I don't know the answer, but like Andy said, I work in a building with 150 really smart, passionate people. I will go find the answer out for folks and do my best. So, and I get to talk fishing, Dylan. I get to talk fishing, which is wonderful.
Yes, and you get to travel the Southeast region,
I
which
do.
has a lot of cool places to fish.
I do.
And you fish a lot.
I was out today. I had my boat out today, and took my son and his Jack and his friend Grayson, and we got 15 fish, all on artificials.
Wow.
Yeah, and I got skunked. I lost the tournament. I snagged a cow nose ray, and they said that was a negative point. So so I couldn't win today.
You were
but
behind the 8 ball.
I had a great day on the water today. So yeah, I do fish. I enjoy it. It's what I love to do.
Yeah, and I know you fish quite a bit too. You recently were in Alabama for that golf council meeting, and I know you and the executive director of the council and some council members and council staff all went out fishing. And I know you've called me a few times to go fishing as well on our boats. It didn't quite work out that one time, but I know you fish quite a bit too, huh?
I do, yeah. I enjoy fishing, and you're right. I had a great trip with a whole host of managers back in June. We have to go out and essentially enjoy the fruits of our labor, right? If we're doing a good job sustaining fisheries, managing them, right, we're there and want to go enjoy them just like everyone else. And so we went out Alabama and caught some red snapper, which was the first time I actually been back in about 20 years
Off
to
of
catch
Alabama?
red snapper off of Alabama. So to see the difference after 20 years is quite amazing and impressive.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Really cool. So a little bit about the background of these two gentlemen, and one thing I want to emphasize about Sean that he mentioned is kind of being the point of contact. We did a couple shows back, you guys remember, about like fisheries, science and management, kind of an overarching view. I was using some of our marine recreational education program presentations and kind of running through things. And you guys remember our Getting Involved presentation, how if you have a question about council stuff, Emily Mulestein is kind of the point of contact for the council, and that's what she does. She answers the phone and kind of points you in the right direction. Anything NOAA related, this is your guy right here. Sean answers the phone very regularly. If he doesn't answer, he calls you back quickly, and he'll point you in the right direction. So it's pretty cool to be able to have that point of contact. But let's get into some of the nuts and bolts. I know the Rec Fishing Initiative is one thing we want to try to cover tonight. We probably have some questions to go through as well. But the one thing that's on the forefront of everyone's mind is this grouper situation. I mean, red snappers always lingering in the background, but I feel like in our area, red snapper kind of falls down the pecking order, at least in my mind it does. Sure. Especially when we have issues like what's going on with red grouper, with Gag Grouper, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of, from your perspective, what's going on with the red grouper, Gag Grouper, where we're at, where we're going, and I realize that's a in-depth question, but do with it as you can.
Yeah, that was pretty open-ended there,
Yeah.
Dylan. But no, I try my best.
But I think I've seen you at council meetings sit in the front of the room for these fireside chats, and people throw these fastballs in there, and you do a really good job answering those questions. So I wanted to leave it open-ended, intended on purpose.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, I'll lead with, I know people are frustrated, right? I'm frustrated as well, and I know we'll talk a little bit about the REC initiative and some thoughts there. But with fisheries management, especially managing recreational fisheries, data collection, estimating landings is difficult, right? And so there's been some recent estimates of landings that I know have gotten people fired up. And what I want people to know is that we take those seriously. We are looking at those very carefully. I think there is kind of an evolution happening in the Gulf of Mexico right now with recreational data collection, where the states have done a very good job of developing their own state reef fish surveys, state of Florida being one of them. And as we move forward with new stock assessments and evaluation of those new surveys, we're able to integrate them into use for management, right? For red grouper, I expect probably this year to be much the same, similar to last year. So we have gotten into this situation where we're having to close the fishery fairly early. We're required by law to set catch limits, and when those catch limits are met, we have to shut down the season. And so we'll look very carefully at when that season might close, and we'll give an estimate likely in April for the council meeting and announce it shortly thereafter. For Gag Grouper, that is something that we're kind of in the progress of evaluating right now. We got a really tough assessment that indicated we have to rebuild this stock. It's very depleted. I know anglers are seeing more fish on the water. We saw some great pictures early on here tonight, and that's what we want, right, with a rebuilding plan and the health of the stock coming back. But the result of that rebuilding plan is we had to shorten the season considerably, and right now we're evaluating the landings data to determine what the season could be for next year, how we could set the catch limit. But I know there was a lot of questions about that recreational data, so maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a lot of different things, obviously, but one thing I want to emphasize is kind of how we have these catch limits, we have a stock assessment, we had the rebuilding plan, and all those things you hit on. You use the term "we," but in reality, the catch limits, the stock assessment's outcome, what it dictated the process do, these are all kind of guidelines that are in place based on the federal system, the MSA, which is outside your purview, which is outside the Gulf Council's purview. This is directives that we kind of have to stay in this box. I kind of call them lanes. Ira does that at MREP.
He does.
The lanes that you have to stay in. And I feel like a lot of times we're bouncing a car in between these guardrails and sometimes slamming into those guardrails in the car and then having to get back in that lane. And that's kind of what I feel we're at with this Gag Grouper problem or Gag Grouper issue or current state of Gag Grouper is that stock assessment was pretty negative, but it concluded in 2021 with a terminal year of data of 2019. And I think everybody identifies that as an issue. And I know you guys at NOAA can be frustrated with the gaps that we face sometimes between what we're seeing on the water, what the science is saying, and kind of what these lanes dictate we do through MSA. So I know we have a Gag Grouper stock assessment coming up, and I believe that CDAR schedules dictates that starts pretty soon, right?
Yeah, I think it's in the next year or so.
Yeah, and that could be hopefully at least some relief to this topic and conversation too, right? Depending on its outcome, of course.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Depending on its outcome, is certainly if the stock assessment is showing what anglers are seeing that this fishery is coming back. Obviously, we had steep cuts in 2023. We're going to have those steep cuts again in 2024. But as the stock rebuilds, we obviously want to continue to increase those catch levels to get back to much larger quotas than what we're at now. But the stock assessment will ground truth where we're at, and if we need to make adjustments, positive or negative, then we'll do that at the time of the stock assessment. One of the things that people may or may not know is that Gag Grouper this year transitions to being monitored with a state reef fish survey, right?
Yep.
So I know that was a big question mark with use of MREP versus state reef fish survey. So we will work very closely with the state of Florida moving forward to monitor Gag.
Trying to make it a little bit clearer for those listening, essentially that is a huge change, because starting in 2024, our landings, our Gag Grouper information will be monitored against state data, not the federal MREP data. So in 2024 and beyond, I believe in perpetuity, right?
Right.
That was a Gulf Council vote, and it was passed by the council, supported by NOAA Fisheries, that we will be monitoring Gag Grouper information in state numbers. So, and the most recent stock assessment for Gag Grouper used state numbers, not MREP numbers.
That's right.
So these are things that are changing. It's just this previous year, 2023, those landings were being monitored in the MREP data, and that's the survey estimates that basically were identified to be a problem. And you hit on it already, that I feel, in my opinion, being involved in this process somewhat on the outside for many years until about 2016, and then getting more involved. I remember back 2004 to 2009, that time frame, there was a lot of cyclicalness in these Gag Grouper, and really Red Grouper too. Red Grouper, I think 2005, we had a really big spike in MREP data, and it caused a closure of the fishery in a year where gas prices were $5 a gallon, and we had a terrible hurricane year, and it just didn't make sense. And at that time, it was, again, I was on the outside, not as involved, but at the time, I was kind of, essentially, the message that got to me was, hey, this is the data, deal with it. Whereas, fast forward to now, it was really you guys at NOAA Fisheries that kind of rang the alarm bell with this Wave 5 data, which I feel is a big step forward in a positive light. And I think we joked before the show that some people did a really good job of telling people about those issues, right? Like that shore-based number, the one intercept that equated to over 100,000 pounds of Gag Grouper numbers, that had a percent standard error of 98%. And that was scary to see that in a presentation. But that presentation was put together by you, given by you at a council meeting on public record, and it was basically pointing out the problems that had been identified by your office that you guys were addressing. And that shore-based number, while it was scary and questionable, and we all have our opinions on it, right? It's already been taken out of the estimate, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I'll give credit, obviously, to stakeholders, fishermen. I mean, when we released the Red Grouper numbers in the summer, there was a lot of frustration around those, and we didn't do our homework with regard to evaluating those numbers like we should have. So when the Gag estimates came out and we saw them, we recognized, hey, we need to spend some more time looking at these. We need to get with the scientists. We need to get with the technical experts and really get into the statistics. And that's when you start looking under the hood, so to speak, and you discover things like, well, yeah, the shore mode really is based on one intercept. You know,
we're missing a couple spark plugs here.
Highly uncertain. Yeah, we're missing spark plugs, right? The car needs a tune-up. Whatever car analogies we want to throw. That's right. But then there's more to the story, right? So more recently, I know the Gulf Council shared some new numbers, right, from MRIP, and it was a considerable reduction in landings for Gag, and people were frustrated, like, how can they change overnight? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is we looked at the numbers, and we realized there were some highly influential estimates as part of this that needed to be corrected, right, and fixed.
And I think you hit on an important note that I want to, again, try to boil down for those listening. That presentation that I'll point to again, that maybe I'm guilty of sharing a little heavily, but it had some big things in it, right? So that shore-based had a percent standard error, or PSE, of 98%, and that, to me, sitting at that council meeting back in January in New Orleans, Dr. Richard Cody from NOAA OST, he works, he's head guy at OST, right? What's his name?
Not head guy, but he's head of MRIP.
Okay.
Correct. So
he's head of MRIP.
Marine Recreational Information Program. You're good with the acronyms, so I feel like I'll be your acronym translator.
Yeah.
So OST is NOAA's Office of Science and Technology.
Yeah.
So I'll be your translator. I'm helpful. I'm helpful here. I'm going to be your help.
And so Dr. Richard Cody at that council meeting really said something kind of eye-opening to me. Is essentially MRIP, anything with a PSE greater than 30%, they start to question, and if the PSE starts to reach that 40-50%, a lot of times it's not even included in the estimate. And so that was his kind of discussion over that one shore-based intercept that equated to 100,000 plus pounds that had a PSE or percent standard error of 98%. He was kind of almost taken aback, in my opinion, that it was even included in the presentation, because he's like, yeah, we're not even going to look at that. Right. So don't even pay attention to that, because we're not even going to include that in the estimate. So to me, that was it was almost too transparent, right? Because it was transparency, like, here's all the estimates that we have for Gag Grouper, and I was like, what the F is going on here? And then to find out, like, hey, that wasn't even ever going to be considered. We know that doesn't make any sense. We're not going to look at it.
You make a good point, and I think one of the roles, and there are many roles.
You guys did a great job of garnishing public comment.
Yeah, but one of the main roles fishermen have is, that's a great example where they're going to be like, nobody catches Gag Grouper from shore, right?
Yeah.
So if we had scientists and statisticians, not like Dr. Cody, who had no idea what Gag Grouper even looked like, they're just looking at numbers, they're just going to run through it. But fishermen can say in a reasonable way, hey, Noah, Gag Grouper from shore is a really rare thing. Mm-hmm. You should relook at how heavy you're weighting it, and that's kind of a statistical term, how much weight you put on this one intercept. Mm-hmm. And Noah, we have some pretty fishy people like, you're right, that shouldn't have so much weight. We need to back off that one because it doesn't have as much, truth to it, if you will, as these other ones that are caught in 120 feet of water, 180 feet of water off of St. Pete. That's probably a more realistic picture of the Gag average catch than someone fishing off of a pier in Weeki Wachee, right? And I'm not saying that's where it was, but that helps. So having fishy scientists is great, and having, engaged fishermen is great as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the benefits of this issue, trying to look at the silver lining here, is also the communication between not only your office, because the Southeast Regional Office is not in charge of MREP. This happens at the national level out of Silver Springs, Maryland. So the conversation and the transparency between MREP HQ up in D.C., the Southeast region, and then you guys with the stakeholders was something that I haven't seen before. And, I mean, you've been working in the region for 20 years. Have you seen that sort of conversation, transparency? I've never seen it personally.
Well, that's really what our goal is going forward, right, is to build that partnership so that you see this kind of seamless one NOAA and partnership with the states, right? So that is more the norm than an unusual case. But you're right? It hasn't always been that way, and we've certainly, I think, changed our business practices to be more like what you just saw with the Gag Grouper situation. I will point out one thing that, MREP often gets equated with, this program in Washington, D.C. And yes, that's where our statisticians are, that's where they run the numbers, but it is a state-federal partnership. We rely heavily working with our state partners. So when you're intercepted at the dock, oftentimes that is going to be a port agent from the state of Florida or a contractor that's working with the state of Florida. So we're one and the same in terms of collecting that data, and we all need that data.
Yeah, and that's a good point in and of. I've heard a lot of people like, well, then why do we talk to the people with the clipboards at the boat ramp if they're just going to use this information against us? But in reality, one of the big issues I saw with this Gag Grouper estimate was there was 32 intercepts, and that's an extremely low number, a frustratingly low number, and I think that was caused a lot of outrage too. But part of that, not a huge part of it, but part of that is people refusing to talk to the scientists, which hopefully that will help. The more science information, the more intercepts, then there's less extrapolation and assumptions that have to be made, essentially. And the pilot project too.
Well, and I often hear, that people refuse to do the intercepts because they don't want it used against them, right? But that's partly what drives up our error and the uncertainty in our estimates, is when we don't collect as much data, we don't have as much data to generate the statistics, so it's more uncertain in terms of the landing estimates that we create. One of the big things and differences that we're trying to understand and look at is why the state reef fish surveys, whether it's Florida or any other state, generate so much lower effort estimates, fishing trip estimates than the Marine Resource or Marine Recreational Information Program, MRIP survey. We need to figure that out, and that's part of some big funding that's coming in through the Inflation Reduction Act that we're working with Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission on right now. So that's exciting as well, because we're putting a lot of money toward trying to resolve some of our recreational data collection problems.
And what you're talking about is the pilot project, the MREP pilot project, right?
That's a separate piece of this, but yeah, the MREP pilot project will look at generating estimates on a monthly basis rather than every 2 months. And then it's also revising the order of the questions. What we found is that based on how we ask the questions to people, it'll generate much higher or much lower effort estimates, ironically enough. So just simple changes to the survey can actually make a huge difference in terms of the estimates.
So a lot of people watching will remember back a few months ago, there were some headlines coming out about MREP having overestimation problems. And then we had this red grouper thing and this Gag Grouper thing, where some of this kind of coincides. But one of the, again, silver linings that's being worked on right now that to me is a positive thing that comes out of a lot of these question marks that are going on, and kind of what you're alluding to is the fact that MREP has been happening on a 2-month wave, and it also has had limited coverage as far as the APIS, the Angular Point Intercept Survey, and the MREP FES, the Fishing Effort Survey, which is the mailing part of it. APIS being the people at the boat ramp with the clipboards, FES being the mailers. And essentially this pilot project is going to inject the funding necessary to increase the numbers of intercepts, surveys, and you go from a 2-month to a 1-month wave, so you have greater, I guess, I don't know the terminology, but essentially you'll be able to take a closer look at some of this stuff with that increase, right? That's the idea behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's on a finer scale, right? So if we have these 1-month analysis, it allows us to respond, because the government
is respond quicker.
We're generally not nimble, I think, so it's we're realizing like we need to be more nimble. So if we can get 4-week intercepts, and that allows us to look at the trend of catches, and like, wow, it's starting to spike here. We really need to bear down on here and really look at this, and like, oh, everything else acting kind of normal. So we can not let it slide so much, but let's focus on something. This is acting a little goofy over here. It allows us to have that more timely reaction, if you will, if something's acting funny.
And a more granular look at some of these maybe shorter seasons with limited access, like with Gag Grouper.
Sure.
Gag Grouper essentially ended up being less than a 2-month season. Right. We had to wait for that whole 2-month wave to be done. Then you have to wait a month for QA, QC. Then you have to wait for that information to start coming out. And there's sometimes a 4-month lag, whereas you start to go with a 1-month wave, it might only be 2 months or maybe 8 weeks before you start having some information come into your office.
And this is fishery dependent data. We depend on fishermen for this data. So if they're like, I ain't telling government nothing, then we're going to assume, well, no one's catching Gag Grouper. There must be no Gag Grouper out there. That's kind of a bad thing. Or I'm going to tell them I caught hundreds and let them all go. Well, there's a catch rate that's really high, and a lot of those might die because they're not descending or they're just being killed otherwise. We need to look at the fishery more closely. So we really want fishermen to be honest as to what they caught and not like run away from any samplers. We depend on you guys for your data. We really do.
And I think that was one of the biggest eye-opening things for me going through the Marine Recreational Education Program is the importance of truthfulness in surveys. Because a lot of times we, on party boats, have had to do mandatory reporting since the 80s in the Southeast Regional Headboat Survey. These guys know about it, for those listening. So we've always had to do reporting. So we hire a new captain and tell them about this reporting, and a lot of times their first question is, well, like, how should I fill this out? What do you mean? Should I put I caught less, or should I put I caught a lot more? And it's like, no, just fill out honestly, because going to one extreme or the other can have some pretty big exponential impacts, especially when we're talking about the number of intercepts being 32. If one guy's like, yeah, I caught 1,000 Gag Grouper today, that can really skew that information and throw things off in a bad way.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember making a very tough phone call to you at some point to let you know that I was shortening the gag season. And
I remember that phone call.
Yeah, I know. It was not a happy day, I'm sure. But in all seriousness, part of what we were looking at was those headboat logbooks that you and so many other headboats are providing data to. And although you represent a small fraction of the harvest, right, it gave us at least a gauge that catch rates were up, more gag were being landed. Maybe we needed to react a little bit more quickly. How great would it have been if we had the charter logbook program still up in existence, so we could have looked at that and had a much greater portion of the fish recovered, or more real-time, not real-time, but at least more timely data from the private recreational sector. So the challenge, obviously, is the faster you try to turn the data, the more costly it's going to be. So really have to kind of manage the goals of what we're trying to do with management and the science and how we can ultimately afford to do all that work.
And also those guidelines that we talked about earlier, those guardrails from MSA, because a lot of people are like, well, as private recreational anglers, why can't I just open this app or create an app and report what I'm catching? And that would be nice, but unfortunately, I sat in the room when the most recent red snapper stock assessment, almost 3 years of work by over 250 people got thrown in the garbage can because some third-party peer reviewers said, no, we don't like the way this was done, we don't like the way this works together, and these third-party peer review people basically had the authority to throw away all that work. And that's what I want to make sure we avoid in our charter reporting, because if we're going to go through the headache of every day reporting what we catch, what we caught and kept, what we caught and released, and do these reports, we want to make sure that information is able to be used in a stock assessment. The only way we can do that is making sure we can pass that third-party peer review by making sure that data is meeting that validation requirement. And that's kind of what holds back the private recreational side of things from reporting, right?
Yeah, we're just challenged by numbers, right? There's a lot of private recreational anglers, and so we can't rely on census-type survey methods in order to estimate their catch. So we have to rely on some sort of survey methodology. Now, I think what we'll see is with effort estimation, whether it's through MRIP or the state surveys, we're going to try to hone in on that universe, especially of offshore anglers, right? Those are the main people that we need effort estimates from for snapper and grouper and jacks and all of those species that we manage at the federal government. So the better we can estimate offshore fishing effort and extrapolate those estimates from intercepts, the better we're going to be in terms of then managing recreational catches and determining what actual landings are.
Yeah, and I think this pilot project will be a really interesting look at that and potentially improving that with the increasing the waves from 2 months to 1 month, and to increase the number of surveys. And then also one thing that I've always kind of questioned about MREP is the treatment or weighting of vessels. How like a Freeman can be treated the same way as a smaller bay boat, right? And that's part of this pilot project as well, looking at that weighting of different catches, right?
Well, so more with the Inflation Reduction Act money that I talked about. So that's $20 million coming to the Gulf of Mexico, and it says for red snapper, but it's really for our reef fish. And so that money is going to go really to four main purposes, right? One is to help our science center with their surveys that they do on research vessels, build artificial intelligence so that data that's coming from video cameras and other surveys that they're collecting can be turned around much faster, right? So that's great, right? The faster we can get data, the less lag time, like you talked about from stock assessments.
Huge improvement.
We can react more quickly to what's happening on the water. Second component is all of the states have their own state surveys, so how do we improve their kind of data management, data sharing, transparency of that data? It's all going to be housed in kind of one location, so that's a huge improvement over 5 separate systems that are operating right now. But then the two that I'm most excited about, discards and effort, are greatest sources of uncertainty for recreational fisheries. Discards, obviously, you probably are like me. You get back from a fishing trip. If you're interviewed at the dock, you're tired. It's been a long day. Someone asks you, well, how many fish did you discard, of what species? And you're thinking back like, I fished a lot of spots today. I don't really have a good idea, right? I didn't keep track of it all that well. So we're going to be partnering with the states, Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission, to look at just some different approaches that maybe we can take to help better quantified discard estimates. And then the same is true for effort estimation. I talked about earlier these differences between the state survey and the federal survey. You know, MRIP is always kind of thrown under the bus because it always produces the higher estimates. So that higher estimate's always wrong. I'm not going to argue it's right, but I'm also not going to sit here and say one is better than the other, because we haven't figured out what causes that gap between the two surveys and whether or not maybe the true answer is somewhere in between them. So we're looking for kind of the gold standard in terms of estimating fishing efforts so that we can all be operating from the same playbook, so to speak.
Yeah. So that's all coming out of that Inflation Reduction Act money that's incoming to the Gulf.
That's correct.
These are all ongoing projects that are going on now. So some positive things in the works.
Yeah, so this is going to be happening over the next 2 to 3 years. So a lot of positive things, a lot of work, a lot of really brilliant people that are working on this.
And that MREP pilot project, I believe we're going to have that concluding someone like 2025, kind of becoming available 2026 timeframe. And we have the Gag Grouper stock assessment coming back up. So there are some positive things that could potentially really alter the timeline. Because let's say in a hypothetical situation, they do a new Gag Grouper stock assessment, and it does capture the pulse of these new Gag Grouper entering the fishery, which is, in my opinion, hopefully what's going to happen, because we've seen a lot more Gag Grouper out there on the water. So if it captures that and says the fishery is healthier, potentially that rebuilding plan goes away, right? Because it's as simple as a stock assessment saying they're not overfished, they're not undergoing overfishing, then all of a sudden all of that reverts back to kind of pre-chaos, right? Yeah. In a hypothetical situation.
I wouldn't want to speculate that the rebuilding plan might go away entirely, but it certainly could mean like we're now setting catch limits considerably higher than the previous rebuilding plan, right? A Gag Grouper that's in the current state and depleted isn't going to grow, 18 years in 2 or 3 years, right? So it takes time to rebuild a fishery and get to those older age classes. When we talk about rebuilding plans, it's really trying to build the biomass, the abundance, but the true biomass, those older, larger fish in the population up to sustainable levels. And that just takes time when those have been removed from the population.
So older, more fecund males and females being present says the population's healthy enough to kind of sustain more fishing pressure.
Right, and then I talked a little bit about biology at the start, right? So the added challenge for Gag is that they're hermaphroditic species that changes from female to male as they transition offshore, and the percentage of males that we estimate in the population now is around 2%, which is down from estimates in the 80s and 90s or closer to 15%. So we're not sure if that's limiting population growth as well, because there's far fewer males, obviously, to reproduce with the females in the population.
And that's the challenge. Those are the big copper bellies, right?
Yeah.
As a fisherman, you want the big fish, and those are the most valuable out there. And so how do you balance that?
And is that a problem? Is the population adapted? Are they now spawning in different ways instead of these big batch spawns?
Great
Are
questions.
they more tactical?
Yeah.
And it's something also that the species can adapt, right? Just today I was talking to someone on a recent trip. We got a lot of catch and release gags, and a couple of them were in the 26 to 28 inch range, already developing
showing
that
the male
copper,
characteristics.
that copper belly.
You'll see that in pressured species where there's a shift, like from what was originally described, let's say in the 1950s or 60s, as the fishery gets pressure, the fish are like, we don't have as many males, so we need to start switching from female to male a little sooner. So you'll see that shift smaller and smaller. That can be okay, but then it gets to a point where it's a slippery slope, and now you've got, a 12-inch hogfish is an adult male. So now you've got, okay, that's a really pressured. So we saw that in the Keys, right? The Keys, for example, then they went to a 1 fish per person, 16 inches, and a 4-month season, because the males were getting just so small, it was getting ridiculous. It wasn't a viable option.
Okay.
So hopefully the grouper, with research, something like that, say, okay, this is okay for now, and we're going to get a sustainable fishery, and the data will show that. So it depends on the data, depends on the science, and again, it takes a lot of people working together to make some of this stuff happen.
Interesting. All right, so I think this is a good pausing point for a second. Let's do one of the giveaways, since we're a little behind on that. And then we'll get into some questions here and try to wrap up the show in a somewhat timely fashion. So first things first, let's give away that 10-hour all-day trip for 2 guests. 10-hour all-day trip for 2 guests. Lucky winner.
Is there a hat? Do we get to pick it out of the hat?
No, it's all.
See, I'm old-fashioned. See, you're so
no
with it,
hats
man.
here.
Man,
John
I'm old.
Paul from Lake Alfred. Congratulations, John. Remember, you got 5 minutes or less to text that phone number on the screen, your full home address, John Paul, to claim your free trip. And we still got some more giveaways, but we want to get into some of these questions here real quick and see what we got there. I know we had one here about what are your thoughts on harvest tags in the private recreational fishery. I know my thoughts on harvest tags, but one of the things is what we talked about earlier was that rec fishing initiative, and that's kind of one of the ideas is some innovative management measures or approaches to this problem, right?
Yeah, and I don't know how familiar people are with the Rec Fisheries Initiative, so kind of in brief, this
True.
was a proposal that I floated well over a year ago at the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council.
It was a metaphorical bomb that you dropped at a council meeting. That's what it was.
But
it's the longest motion I've ever seen.
And he got it passed.
Yes.
Genius.
Well, it's because everybody was like, "What?"
Really?
That's all true.
You dazzled him.
That is
You
all
dazzled
true.
him.
But the motion really came out of some frustration on my end, but also listening to all of my peers around that table and stakeholders just frustrated about management of recreational fisheries, right? And so, my perspective is that we are quickly exhausting a lot of our traditional fishery management measures, size limits, bag limits, closed seasons. And we need to start thinking outside the box and being creative and innovative. So in terms of harvest tags, to answer the question, I'm open to the idea and concept of looking at that. I think it's really important that we build support and buy-in and trust with stakeholders if we're going to use a management method like that. I think it has to be the right fishery, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to work for all fisheries. So my recommendation to anyone that's listening is just keep an open mind, right? Is that this Rec Fisheries Initiative, I think, is an opportunity for stakeholders and others to come together and really hammer through some tough questions like that and see if it might work for a fishery or not.
Yeah, and the Rec Fisheries Initiative also has evolved from that motion that you made to now there's a work group forming of different agency folks, and the idea with that is they're going to identify there's a steering committee forming that's going to be made up of agency folks, some stakeholder input, and work through the council process in a pretty transparent way in the council arena. And then they are going to work on identifying a work group, which would be made up of stakeholders. And from there, they're going to be tasked with kind of tackling bites out of this rec fishing initiative, is my understanding, right?
Yeah, so the steering committee is a smaller group, let's say 8-ish folks, and there's going to be some agency folks and council folks. There's going to be fishermen on it.
Okay.
And they're going to design kind of the makeup of the bigger working group, right? And there's a working group steering committee.
The steering
Which is
committee.
the bigger one.
Yeah.
But the bigger one they'll have fishermen like you on there, right? They'll have community leaders, people who are respected in the fishing community to be voices on this, in addition to council staff, state folks, NOAA folks. I'll probably sit on one of them. But they're going to be representative of all of us. So it's going to be definitely a group effort representing all voices in the community moving forward on it. So it's exciting. It's going to be a transparent thing. It's going to have all voices recognized and heard to try and solve these new approaches, if you will, to fisheries management, recreational fishing management.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's exciting.
100%.
Yeah, and just real quick as an example, in the South Atlantic, I know we're talking Gulf tonight, but we just released a notice for grant awards in the South Atlantic, and we're going out.
I thought you were going to start talking about golden tilefish
No.
for a second.
I don't even know what's. I've already got calls on that
we just
one.
put $880,000 of fishery service money toward 5 exempted fishing permits.
Oh, that was huge.
Yeah.
With the FWC.
So there's a lot of
exempted.
frustration surrounding South Atlantic red snapper. I don't want to talk about that in detail tonight, but the reality is we're trying to do something different and new and innovative, and so the state of Florida Florida came in with some great ideas in terms of full retention study, aggregate bag limit. So we're testing that out. We're providing those resources for funding. And so, you know, to me, those are the types of concepts we need to continue to pursue and really be creative and thoughtful with.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. So essentially the South Atlantic, again, we're not going to get too in-depth into it. We've talked about some of the issues in the South Atlantic, but essentially the South Atlantic is, in my opinion, such a desperate place that there's been discussion about bottom fishing seasons, literally closing access to bottom fishing in certain times of the year because of the discard issues and some of the other problems that have become kind of a desperate situation. So now the FWC has come up with these exempted fishing permits, which is basically a way to go outside of fishing regulations to study a problem. And it's really cool that they've been passed, accepted, and now funded to move forward with that research. That aggregate bag limit study is pretty interesting. And we in the Gulf get to sit over here and like, oh, what are they doing? And kind of watch the outcome of that. And everybody's going to benefit from the science from it.
I think so. I mean, these are 5 projects that get to work outside the traditional bag limits to conduct real research, to hopefully give viable options to manage wreck fishing moving forward for these reef species.
Yeah.
So it's continuing the desire to do better, right, and to use research to inform that better process.
And it's also, in my opinion, a surefire kind of sign of things to come with the agency working more closely with the state and the communication between stakeholder groups. So it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves through that process as well.
Right.
So let's try to get into another question here. Do they take into account, this is a good one, do they take into account weather factors when generating catch estimates, fishable versus non-fishable days? And I know this was a conversation around the council table, but it's a little bit more of a difficult discussion, I think.
Yeah, and so I'll caveat this by saying Sean and I are not the right people to be asking this question because we're not the statisticians. But I will say that the catch estimates are based on information that's provided by you through effort surveys, right? So if you don't go fishing because of the weather, you're just going to report the trips that you went fishing on during that period, and then also the intercept data, right? So we know obviously when we go, we're going to be sampling on days that the weather isn't that good, right?
And that's one thing. The APIS survey happens regardless of the weather,
right?
Regardless of the time. So the APIS survey, the Angler Point Intercept survey, is the one where someone shows up to a boat ramp with a clipboard to ask questions, and it could be blowing 45 and snowing, and they're gonna show up to that boat ramp with a clipboard, and if someone sees them, they're like, "What is this idiot doing here? They're wasting our taxpayer dollars. They're gonna say we didn't catch any fish. What in the world?" But in reality, it's kind of a positive thing that they're there because you're capturing those zeros.
That's correct.
Absolutely are. And the Fishing Effort Survey does that as well, because they're 2 separate things, right? The Fishing Effort Survey is actually a mail survey. And I know that sounds like this is 2024. Why are you doing a mail survey? It actually works. People can sit down with it, okay, let me think about how much I fished in the year or how much I fished in the past month. And anglers and captains can really kind of, put their brain on it, if you will. And they were like, I didn't fish in May because it blew 25 knots every day. That'll be captured in the data. So that's really important. So yeah, we do look for those things. So at least we try and capture that, and that'll help the scientists, move forward with their analysis.
Yeah. But from a fisherman's standpoint, like with the Gag Grouper situation, and specifically the red grouper situation. So the first 6 months of the year, 60% of the quotas landed. Then 19 days of July, another 70% of the quota was landing according to the MREP numbers. And then from my perspective, looking at July, I canceled a week or more of trips there because the weather was bad in that period. And we have big boats, so
you have large
it's
boats.
those fishable days become a big question mark, and I think that's kind of where the idea of do they take that into account, because when you look at these shorter seasons, you can the non-fishable days hit you a lot harder, right? If you've got a 6 or 7 week Gag Grouper season and you've got a week and a half of bad weather, it's very apparent when you hear these big numbers of landings. It's like, how is that possible with the weather? But essentially, that's the idea around trying to capture that, is that the APIS surveys, the people at the boat ramps, the fishing effort survey is supposed to capture that.
All going to inform this.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I will say, so with the red grouper season in 2023, that season was based on projected landings from prior years, right? So we weren't closing the fishery in 2023 based on that July landings estimate. That came afterward, right?
Unfortunately.
And I look at that estimate and I question it, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm in the same boat you are and others are in terms of looking at it, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And we have gone back and scrutinized it and looked at some of the details of that.
That was one of the cool parts for me, and a lot of people can sometimes get frustrated with me when I try to be a little bit more positive about some of this stuff. But like, I remember that phone call in which that wave 4 red grouper data came out, and you and I talked. And I felt like you were almost more upset than I was about it, because you were talking about reopening red grouper in 2023, because you and I both thought, because of the first 6 months of the year, only 60% of the quota being landed, there's only another 19 days in July, we're probably going to have quota left on the table. We're going to be able to reopen a season, and that's a positive thing for recreational fishermen. And then to get that wave 4 number showing the overage of red grouper in an unexpected way, I felt like you were almost more frustrated than I was on the phone, which to me gave me a little bit of positivity to, like, hey, there's people on the inside who are working towards these problems as well. So,
well, and to be frank, right? So I'm here to sustain fisheries and manage fisheries to the best of my ability, but I'm not going to be sitting in my St. Pete office thinking about why I'm going to be wanting to close people down, right? I want to give you guys fishing opportunities, right? That's our goal. If we don't provide access, what are we doing in terms of our jobs, right? And so to me, that was the frustration, right? Red grouper looked optimistic that I was going to be able to reopen sometime after that July closure, give some more fishing opportunities. It just didn't work out that way, right? But certainly that's always our goal, is trying to figure out how can we maximize fishing benefits. It's becoming ever more challenging because more anglers, more boats. You've heard this before from me. Better boaters, better electronics, right?
Better technology.
Way better technologies.
Right? Everyone can be a really good fisherman.
I know. Yes. But like I was at the boat show, CMAP and chirps and all these things.
It's
it's crazy, and we're not building more ocean, but a lot of people move in Florida because this is an amazing place to live, and fishing's a pretty great pastime. So it's tough to balance all those things. It really is.
It's a big challenge.
But it's great that people enjoy it, and we also sit in the Department of Commerce, so we realize the importance that recreational fishermen have as economic drivers to coastal communities. Your guests come down, they stay in hotels, they eat at restaurants, locals buy boats, buy gas, buy ice, right? Shutting down a fishery, we're hurting a lot of folks, tackle stores, whatever. It's not something that we want to do, right? We want to have everybody, and this is creating American jobs, and these are pastimes for folks. It's just not what we design. Andy's not in there. It's not how things go.
But getting back to your earlier comment, right? The Magnuson Act provides those sideboards that we often are using a bumper car and going back and forth and hitting the walls and our heads against, right? Because that's also the added challenge. Is the Magnuson Act requires these catch limits. They require accountability measures, which essentially we have to close seasons when we meet the catch limits, or adjust seasons if the catch limit was met in the prior year. So all of that is the overlay of federal management, which isn't necessarily the same that occurs at the state level, and creates more confusion.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely tricky. Real quick, we want to do another giveaway here and then get into some more questions for sure. So let's see here. We did our 10-hour all-day giveaway. Let's go ahead and do our 5-hour half-day giveaway and see who the lucky winner is of that 5-hour half-day for 2 guests. Lucky winner is David Larson. Congratulations. And you are the lucky winner of the 5-hour half-day for 2 guests. Remember, you got 5 minutes or less, David, to text us your full home address to the phone number at the bottom of the screen. So our next question was about commercial versus recreational quotas and allocations, which is a very simple conversation
It really is.
to get into.
I think you should answer that.
Yeah, you know this one pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that frustrates me sometimes is you hear the catchphrases, right? The headlines of, oh, this group's ruining the fishery, that group's ruining the fishery, when in reality, for example, commercial fishermen have the most regulation, the most regulatory responsibility, and they have exceptionally small allocations when compared to the recreational fleet. For Gag Grouper, it was recently changed. It's like 65-35 off the top of my head.
Yep.
And Red Grouper is like 70-30.
Well, it's 65 recreational.
Yes.
35 commercial. So the rec guys get 2/3 the fishery.
Yeah.
And that's almost what, 3 million pounds or 4 million pounds?
Yes.
3 million pounds, right?
And the commercial guys have just barely over 1 million.
Yeah, like I think that, in 2022, I just looked up, they got like 910,000 pounds landed.
Yeah.
The Rex landed 2.3 million pounds.
Yes.
So there's
And
the
then-
allocation for Gag Grouper.
And then Red Grouper's even greater
Yeah,
to
for Gag Grouper. Yeah, sorry. Red Grouper.
yeah, Red Grouper's even greater to recreational. I think it's like 70 something percent, 73, 27, I believe, something like that. Off the top of my head. So these allocations are very heavily recreationally weighted.
Yep.
When it comes to red snapper, it's even. It's 51-49.
Yep.
Commercial has 51%. So that's the only fishery. Red snapper is the only fishery that commercial has more. As far as like the big main species.
Right. And the commercial guys are accountable for every pound landed. Right?
So they have mandatory reporting. They
call
have
in, call out. They only can
hail
land at certain places. They can
vessel
only
monitoring systems.
They have trip limits. They can only have so many pounds on their boat at a time. So they're under a pretty small camera, if you will.
Literally, a lot of them have cameras on the boat.
with the AI that you guys mentioned earlier. So and that's getting better,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we can understand what they're catching.
We're actually a part of, speaking of AI and cameras, we're actually a part of the cooperative research project with the Charter Fishermen's Association and the, not Sea Grant, the Texas people that do the shrimp stuff.
The Art Center?
No, I'm forgetting about it.
Texas Sea Grant? Yeah.
No, that did the shrimp.
LGL.
LGL, that's it.
Gotcha.
LGL.
Right, yeah.
Man, I totally blanked on that one. But LGL and the Charter Fishermen's Association, we're going to put cameras on the boat with the AI. So literally every fish that comes up, they'll be able to tell what we caught and kept, what we caught and released. It'll be really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing how that AI works.
Well, and my understanding is you worked a little bit with Moat Marine Lab on one of their portable camera systems as well for recreational fisheries, right?
So the portable camera project that we worked with Moat on was, again, piloting that AI for use in the commercial sector. Yeah. So they were mounting them on our boats and testing them on poles on our boats during a recreational trip for use in the commercial sector.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Well, I think that's really great because you guys catch a lot of fish. I'm not just, you guys catch a lot of fish. I've been out here before, so it's wonderful. And I have to give you credit. It shows you put your money where your mouth is. This is your family's business, and you are investing, and you want all the data to count, and you're willing to put your company out there to help collect data and develop new methods. So well done to you guys.
And I think the AI is the AI video kind of processing is one of the most promising things in my mind that I'm most excited about, because those fisheries independent science, we spent most of the night tonight talking about fisheries dependent science with these surveys and estimates of landings. Fisheries independent science, they have a huge camera project that's across the entire Gulf of Mexico. It's really impressive, the number of cameras that get dropped, all this information that's being captured. But to pay a scientist to sit there and count fish in the camera frame, and they can only look at a certain...
It's a very painful
the
process.
Hours of video,
and they can only look at small portions of the video. So they're testing small areas of the Gulf for a small amount of time, and they're only looking at a small amount of video, whereas this AI would allow that camera to sit down there for hours, and by the time they pull it up and dries on the back deck of the boat, the computer's already processed the entire information.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's very, very promising.
Optical technology, I mean, a million potato chips go by and these air jets are knocking out the bad ones, having that, translated to fishing is really exciting.
I like how you made it a potato
Well, I'm
chips.
short and fat and I like snacks, so, I naturally go to potato chips, I'm there.
That was awesome.
So I do want to go real quickly back to the allocation question, because we hear this a lot, as you noted, and a lot of the allocations in the Gulf of Mexico were based on historical landings, and they are now being periodically reviewed, typically every 5 to 7 years now, and the council has an opportunity to change them. The way that they change them could be contingent on a number of factors, right? But essentially, at the end of the day, it is probably one of the most controversial and difficult parts of the management process, as you can imagine.
I think you get sued every time. I'm pretty sure that's
well,
how
we
it's
still have
happened.
a pending lawsuit.
On the Red Grouper one, yeah.
We can't talk about that.
It is pretty wild, but the contentiousness of allocation shifts are huge, but it is something that does get reviewed quite a bit. Let's see.
Very interesting. This is a commercial fisherman. I don't know who he is. I was just typing him for his name. But he was explaining that they've been selected as part of the logbooks to record their discards, and they're currently throwing out 500 to 600 pounds of Gag Grouper because they don't have allocations. So they are throwing them back. So they're getting ready to join that program to help further.
So they want to put a camera on their boat so they can show
to document
the discard numbers because they're having to throw back all these gags.
And the encounter rate. That fisherman's encountering this many gag, which helps the population scientists understand population gag in that area because he's a professional fisherman. He's fishing down where they are. So.
And that's one of the things that I think people forget about the commercial sector. Is one of those headlines is the commercial fisheries or the commercial fishermen are ruining the fishery or catching all the fish. But in reality, a lot of times it's commercial fishermen that are piloting these camera projects that are really lending themselves to science in a big way because the number of fishermen is known because they're under a moratorium. They have vessel monitoring systems. They have to hail out. They have to hail in. They have to do the 3-hour landing notification. And then they have the checks and balances of having to sell fish to a seafood dealer that's federally licensed that has to do trip tickets. And you have all these checks and balances, and it really allows fisheries science to be interjected into that in a big way. Plus, you have the observer program. There's a lot of information being collected from the commercial fishery that benefits recreational fishermen in a big way.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
it's interesting. So we did our 5-hour giveaway, our 10-hour giveaway. Let's do our swag pack giveaway. Get to one more question here, and then we're gonna have to start wrapping things up. We're a little bit behind.
Oh man,
I know. We're having a good combo.
this is fun.
I'm kind of going through it. It's more amberjack and tilefish that people are asking about, and of course red snapper coming up.
So the golden tilefish situation is more South Atlantic. We're going to try to stay somewhat Gulf focused. Amberjack dates. This is a good question. Do we have projections on amberjack? I know April Gulf Council meeting, we're going to have a real good idea of what our red grouper and gag grouper season should be for this year. Amberjack season, when could we potentially expect that projection?
I'm not sure we're going to need to project it, but I'll double check. I won't give you a definitive answer tonight, but I believe the season is going to be set September 1 through October 31st. This will be the first year where we've been able to fully implement the season for those 2 months.
And that's what I remember hearing, but I couldn't remember off the top of my head because other things have come up. But essentially, potentially, if Gag Grouper work out, we could have Gag Grouper and Amberjack open together in September, potentially.
Correct. Yes.
And then Amberjack all the way through the end of October, which is cool. And red snapper, I mean, on a more positive note, seems to be federal for-hire red snapper, seems to be getting managed pretty well to its ACT, so we're expecting almost the exact same season, according to my uneducated guess, because we fished almost to 99.
Are you running the projections for me now?
Yeah.
Can I hire
might
you?
As well. I mean, we fished like 97% of the ACT, so I would imagine it's pretty much the exact same season.
Yeah, we've been able to do a good job of dialing in and estimating the for-hire red snapper season. So I think you're exactly right to expect much of the same this year as you did last year for red snapper.
And the state, I went to the FWC Commission meeting in Tallahassee. They did a presentation. I believe it was like 98% of their ACL or ACT was what was landed statewide. So the state private recreational red snapper season should be pretty similar as well. So pretty good news on red snapper fronts.
Yeah.
And red snapper, I believe there's going to be a catch level increase coming, right? that was passed recently.
A small increase
Small.
that was passed last year that we're finally able to implement through rulemaking.
Yeah,
So that's more good news.
And the impressive thing about red snapper is there are over 15 million pounds harvested out of the Gulf between commercial and rec. It's a lot of fish. That's a lot of fishing. So that's really exciting and encouraging news. It really is. And that with that little bit increase will be even more. But that's a lot of fishing opportunity for folks. So that's really kind of cool. And 10 years ago wasn't like that. You know what I mean? So
I remember.
we've been through it, right? So yeah, I think it's just really that's a really good news story.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, 10 years ago, it was 2014. We were down to like, I think 30 days.
Oh, then it went to like almost 3 days
Yeah,
federal.
I think that was 2016.
Yeah,
when
yeah, it
went
went
to, like, 3 days.
precipitously down.
Yeah.
And now it's come back up. And that's an alternative management strategy, having the states do it through a pilot program and running from there. So that's a really good news story that we can build on.
Yep, amen to that. What about peer review on red snapper? We're starting from scratch there.
Yes and no. So we did a research track assessment, which I think at this point we're in agreement. We're going to probably throw out that process going forward. It's just not working, right?
Yeah.
It's not an effective process.
Tried it with triggerfish, and that didn't work, and scamp
just
too.
becomes too unwieldy, too cumbersome, ultimately not producing the outcomes we want. It's slow, and then as transparent of a process it is, it's just not achieving its main purpose. So what's going to happen next is next week there's a Science and Statistical Committee meeting, and our Southeast Fisheries Science Center staff are going to talk through the review with that SSC and discuss what we're recommending move forward with that red snapper assessment, what things we disagreed with, what things we think are good advice from the CIE, the experts that reviewed the assessment. So our hope is we'll put it back on a path, forward for success. Now, how long that'll take in terms of when we get to that red snapper assessment and completing it, I don't know yet, but I think we are going to certainly try to continue to move forward with a red snapper assessment in some modified form.
Yeah, instead of like a research track methodology, I've heard a lot of conversations around like trying to go a benchmark type assessment, right?
Right, exactly.
So
Now,
just
is this public, or is this just for NOAA Fisheries members to be part
Next week's meeting is public.
of? Can they find it on the website?
the SSC meeting would be broadcast over a webinar and the Gulf Council website page. So gulfcouncil.org, right on their homepage, you'll see the calendar. Then you can see what days they're meeting, and that's the council meeting page. So hit home on that real quick, and then you'll see scroll down a little bit. Here we'll go to PIP so everybody can see, but the council calendar there above Andy's head is, you see those dots. Those dots are going to be, and then if you scroll down a little bit more,
The 27th and 28th.
yeah, if you,
Those two.
yeah, it'll show you what meeting is, and then if you click on that, that'll take you to the actual page. And this is the page where you can register for the webinar right there, and the agenda will be posted there too. And that's how I find out when these meetings are and follow along with these meetings, is right through the gulfcouncil.org page. And Josh, while we're here, we might as well show our fishery science and management page that we've created. So if you go on our website to hubbardsmarina.com, hit fishing trips, and then scroll down to more info, you can hit the fisheries science and management page. And the previous live show where we kind of did the overview of how fisheries science and management works, a lot of the videos are housed here, but then there's a lot of helpful links down here, from Gulf Council to CDAR to NOAA email list, a lot of helpful information. And the link we just showed you quickly is housed on this page as well. So definitely check out the fisheries management page, and we'll be adding tonight's video there as well. And it'll kind of be a housing center as we move forward and do videos like this, where people can kind of go and learn a little bit, hopefully.
That's great. That's great.
It's the idea, at least. Do you guys have anything else to add before we wrap her up?
Just a huge thank you.
Yeah.
We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate being on the show, and certainly invite us back.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to having you guys back and
Please do.
talking more as we move forward. And hopefully we'll be back in April again to talk about our super long red grouper and gag grouper season.